It's a good question, and I'll tell you why it's a good question. To cut a long story short, there's no point building a city where people are poor. We don't want to build a poor city. We've been a poor city, and it's rubbish. The other thing as well is that we don't want employers that exploit workers, and that
was fantastic information.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor, I'll start with the first question.
Yep.
What specific, measurable outcomes demonstrate your impact in reducing unemployment and promoting skills development in disadvantaged areas?
It's a good question, and I'll tell you why it's a good question. It's because one of the things that is quite a difficult thing to do is measuring your impact, because particularly issues around employment or people who aren't in employment, and particularly young people who are not in employment. So the so-called NEETs, we call them NEETs, it's a technical term, it means not in employment, education or training. So basically, they've left school at 16 and they're not doing anything. They're not in a job, they're not in college, they're not on a training course, they're not volunteering, they're just not doing anything. And there are quite a significant number of, not massively worrying, but also a number of young people in a city of this size who we're not quite sure what they're doing and where they are. And those are a bit of a concern to us. But in terms of NEETs, we've probably got 600 or 700 in the city. So the important thing is that it's not just the city council that are working to promote employment, to encourage people to go into training, to create jobs. We do it through a wide range of partners. Some of them are state partners, like Department of Work and Pensions, Employment Service, colleges, further education, colleges, schools to some extent, and in the private sector, businesses that want to work with us, businesses that are looking for skills. So actually to measure all of that is quite a challenge actually, because one organisation will have numbers of one organisation will count what it needs to count, and other organisations will count what they need to count, and it's quite often that the two aren't the same. So we are always trying to look at better ways of counting, assessing, looking where in particular the issue is, because the other thing as well is that whilst numbers are important, they only tell part of the story. So in a city like Manchester, in terms of employment, training, opportunities, there are some areas which are have more of those and some areas which have less. And so actually, if I said, what's the level of young people in South Manchester that aren't in employment or training, NEETs? It's quite low. It's proportionately in the city. But if we go to the north or the east or Wythenshawe, some of the poorer districts, some of the more, if you like, disadvantaged districts, then that number will be 2 or 3 times what it is. So we're not dealing across the city with a uniform problem. So we are dealing with areas which are more deprived, and young people find that there are less opportunities. And so part of the task is to make sure we know those numbers and know those statistics. But again, it's not always so, it's not as straightforward as we would like it to be. But we use basic data that we get from government agencies, basically. And along with that, we use data that we collect from agencies that we work with. So youth clubs, youth providers, colleges, schools to some extent. But it is complicated because it's a big city. We are a growing city, which is a very important point, I think, in certainly my responsibility, there's no point anymore talking about percentages. We often get compared, well, what's the number of young people that aren't in employment in Manchester in a percentage terms? Well, if you take percentage, it's probably not changed very much in the last 5 years. COVID apart, that was a different issue. But actually, 5% of 5 years ago isn't 5% of now in totality. So whilst we sometimes feel comforted by the percentages, 4% last year, it's only 4% this year, that's 4% of Manchester's population has grown by nearly 100,000 in 10 years. So there's literally 100,000 people here more than there were 10 years ago. So percentages, whilst they have a place, they're meaningless in terms of actual policy, because you're talking about a real number of people, not just a mythical percentage. Governments and agencies like to use percentages because it gives them a sense of comfort that things are not getting out of hand. But 4% of 500,000 is not 4% of 600,000.
Of course.
So the answer, in short, is we aren't entirely on top of the figures and the statistics, and there are things that we could do to improve that. But basically, that's a consequence of really trying to tackle the problem through a multiple of agencies, none of whom, or very few of whom, agree on how many this and what percentage that.
Yes.
So
fantastic.
It's the consequence of working in partnership with others. Is you can't always nail down exactly where you are.
How do you respond to concerns that increasing the living wage could negatively affect small businesses and reduce employment opportunities?
Well, in my, I have a role here at the council, which I've mentioned, which is I'm the executive member for employment, skills and leisure and libraries and digital inclusion. So it's quite a big portfolio. I have a part-time role, and that happens to be I'm the coordinator for the Greater Manchester Living Wage campaign.
All right, okay.
So living wage is something I know quite a bit about. The problem with the living wage, in terms of we approach it, and the City Council takes, I think, pretty much the same view, is that you need, when you're arguing about the living wage and the real living wage, the one that is recognised as being the best measure of hourly income, is that there are basically two audiences for that message. One is, and they're not exclusive, the audiences, they're not, it's not just this group over here, here's this message, and this group over here, here's this message. But there are basically two messages. One is about social justice. So paying low pay, keeping people in low incomes is socially an injustice. It is not, to put it crudely, I suppose, it's a moral issue rather than an economic issue. We shouldn't pay people poverty wages in a society that still suggests that it's the 6th largest economy in the world. And whether you believe that or not, we are a significant global economy. And in a significant global economy, and particularly a growing city like Manchester, where industry, technology, all of that is, we are the 2nd fastest growing city region outside of London. We should not be paying people less than what it costs them to live a decent life. The other argument, and the one that we use a lot more with businesses, directly to businesses, is the economic argument. And the economic argument for the living wage is largely, it is actually advantageous for you as an employer, because whilst you think it might cost you money to pay these workers £12 X an hour rather than £6 an hour, actually there are costs to that to those poor practices which are hidden, but they're real. So, to cut a long story short, all the evidence that we have as a living wage campaign and the Living Wage Foundation, which manages the scheme, if you like, nationally, they've got tons of evidence, academic evidence, that businesses that pay the living wage have less staff turnover, less absenteeism, less sickness, because people feel they're being fairly rewarded for the work that they do. So they don't feel the need to move on. They don't feel the need to take time off to earn money elsewhere. And they're not living a life that is detrimental to their health. It's the stress, the fact they can't buy the clothes for the kids, they can't put food on the table, makes them ill. And if you remove that worry from people, you have a much more loyal, much more effective and much more productive workforce. So economically, the argument against the living wage has been won. Right? Academically, if you like, intellectually it has. It's still a long way to go with some employers, and in particular sectors, it is still quite difficult. But we've had a lot of success in Greater Manchester, particularly in sectors like construction. So construction companies traditionally are very fragmented. They have a lot of casual workers. And we've had quite a lot of success with major construction companies in getting them to sign up to the living wage. So it's a massive, for Manchester, I think we're currently at around 250 employers. There are about, in the Greater Manchester sub-region, there are about 900 employers who pay the living wage, who are accredited living wage. There'll be others who pay it, but they're not accredited. About 250 of that 900 are in Manchester, and the others are in the other 9 boroughs. And so Manchester's really been quite forceful. It's something that Bev Craig, the leader, has promoted. She's very upfront during Living Wage Week. She's very visible. So it is something, because at the end of the day, there's no point building a city where people are poor. We don't want to build a poor city. We've been a poor city and it's rubbish.
But no more.
But no more. And I think the other thing as well is that we don't want employers that exploit workers, and that's, we want the employment in this city to be effective, productive, good quality. We want employers to be here because it's a good place to do business, it's got a good reputation, it's got a skilled and effective workforce, not because it's got cheap labour. That somebody else we don't want that to happen anywhere, but it's certainly not having it happening here.
It's a good news.
It is good news. I mean, there's there's still industries and particular trades where the pay is low. There's always going to be a sort of shadow economy where it's very difficult to legislate, but it is, we want to be a city. For many years, it's probably true to say that Manchester has felt like, for some people, like it's a tale of two cities almost. It's, there's a very booming, got loads of opportunities in the city centre. We've got out in Wythenshawe, we've got the airport, we've got, I know it's not in Manchester, but we've got Trafford Park, we've got big industrial sites all over the place. There are job opportunities, but there is a significant proportion of our residents who don't feel that they're locked into that's for them. And I often always describe it as it's like a kid looking in a sweet shop window. They can see, we have literally people in areas of high unemployment and high deprivation who can literally see the industries and the jobs and the opportunities that are being created. And our task is to make sure that there are pathways into those for all of our residents, not just people who come here and more welcome as they are, not just students who come and decide to stay, not people who move from other cities. I mean, there are some, significant industries here, and we're looking at, building different sectors, particularly around sort of biomedicine sector, advanced engineering and all of that. And we want Manchester's people to feel they've got the opportunity. to get into those jobs. Because at the end of the day, we all, when we get up for work in the morning, we all feel like, I wish we had a day off, or I wish we could go and sit in the park or go fishing or go for a walk or whatever. But we've got to work, and that's the nature of our society, isn't it? That you earn money but what we recognise as well is that it's very important that you earn enough money to sustain yourself and your family and to live a decent life. But work is about much more than that as well. And I think the government's agenda at the moment is around poor health is reflected in high unemployment, poor mental health in particular. And we've got a real issue with that in Manchester in terms of younger people, NEETs, and coming out of the pandemic. Some areas, some sectors are still struggling to recover, even though it's, whatever it was, 5 years. Seems incredible, but 5 years since the first lockdown.
Yes.
The anniversary was this week. Seems about 5 minutes to me, but
About 5 years gone.
it's gone very quickly, and it's still, parts of the economy have still not recovered, and the ways of working is very interesting. I mean, I deal with a lot of businesses, some quite large businesses, and if you look at particularly like the professional services, lawyers, accountants, architects, professional, particularly in the city centre, they've never really returned to the methods of working that they did pre-pandemic. They are mostly still now 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office and the rest of the time working from home. And that's not really changed. There are some areas where it has.
Yes.
But in those professional services, that is almost now. And I spoke to a chief executive of a large accountancy firm a few weeks ago, and he said, when we recruit people now, they expect that pattern of work. They tell us that they want to work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They want to be at home
This time,
Monday, Friday, and that's their conditions for coming to work for them.
Okay, Councillor, what is one ambitious policy or initiative you aim to achieve during your term, and what challenges do you foresee in implementing it?
I think to say it was one policy would probably be a little bit not true. But the key issue, I think, one of the key issues for me is those people who are not in employment or not in pathways to employment, like training or apprenticeships or whatever. Those people who are, for a variety of reasons, are not engaged in the labour market in any way. And that might be because of age, might be because of lack of relevant education and skills. So older people who perhaps as a consequence of the pandemic were made redundant or, their employment disappeared. They might be in their 50s, 55 plus is an issue for us. 55 plus is the two issue areas. I mean, we care about all our residents who are struggling, but is young people and people who are over 55, because for different reasons, they find it difficult to access the labour market. And one of the programmes that we operate across the city is largely through community groups. I think there's about 23 of them at the moment, which is engaging with those people to get them back into employment or training. So for older people, it might be that the job they did has disappeared. They don't, let's give an example, warehouse worker. So you might work, 10 years ago, you might have worked in a warehouse. Your job was to drive a truck and up and down some rows of shelving and pick things off and take them to the front. And that was your job, and there were a few of you and all the rest of it. The machine does that now. They don't need people to drive it up and down. I went to a business up in Cheetham the other day, and they pick off the shelves. They have a machine. They go in, they type in which product it is they want. The machine goes, picks it, scans it, brings it back, and drops it in a big container. Well, 10 years ago, that would have been
That wasn't the
a
case.
55-year-old bloke, potentially with quite low skills. It's not an easy job, but it doesn't require high levels of maths or English.
Yes.
It doesn't require high levels of qualifications. So those people are coming out of work, and where are the jobs that their skills match?
Yes.
Now, the thing is, what we have to do is to look at people holistically in the round and say, but they have attributes which are valuable to an employer. They know how to work. They've been doing it all their lives. They're reliable. They're conscientious. They're flexible. They understand how factories, warehouses, shops, how they work, and they have experience that younger people don't have, and that's valuable to an employer. And why can we promote that? Can we make that a skill? Can we make that a qualification? And younger people, obviously, it's 90% of the time it's lack of experience and skills. The job that they're going for, they just don't have the skills and qualifications for. So that's a different challenge. But I think the fact that we have programs that target, sounds bad, doesn't it, target, but focuses on groups that, there are 100 definitions in this business. Left behind, NEET. They're all basically people who, for one reason or another, sometimes good or bad, but of a wide variety of reasons, are distanced from the labour market, which is a technical, boring way of saying they can't get a job. Something's stopping them from getting a job. And it could be they don't have the right technical skills, they don't have the right education, they've got life experiences that haven't helped them. So they might be in trouble with the police, they might have a criminal record, they might even have been in prison. Those people live in our city, want to contribute to our city, despite what the right-wing media and press say. I've very rarely met anyone who wouldn't want to go to work, get a decent wage, and live their life as they want to lead it. There's this idea that there's thousands of people who are just happy to sit on benefits is nonsense. It's an embarrassing argument, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't tolerate it. And even if there are those people, it's because they've had such poor experiences. They've had very limited life experiences, very limited opportunities, not because they're just bad people. And portraying people as lazy and bad, apart from being wrong,
yes, of course,
is pointless.
Yes.
It doesn't get you anywhere.
But it's supposed to be some reforms on the benefit system. So.
There is a reform, and I think the thing about the benefit system is that it's massively expensive. Nobody's arguing that social security and keeping people safe and secure is cheap, because it's not. And nobody's arguing that there are lots of people who are in receipt of one benefit or another who probably, with the right support and the right help and the right guidance and pathway, could be working. That's obvious. We've been saying that in Manchester forever. So that's not new, but it's how do you do it, and how do you approach people who don't see any future, don't think they've any worth, don't see the point of training or retraining, because they don't see it's the kids with the sweets. They can see the sweets, they just don't know how to get the money to buy them, or even be allowed in the shop. So there are many, many barriers to stopping people from working, and laziness is not a very significant one. It is not what the media would portray as people just like to be lazy. People struggle to get through life, because there are a whole series of barriers. And one of the things that this little project that we do with these organisations is to look at individuals, take their whole picture, childcare, mental health, getting to work. You know, a number of times, over the years, many years, I've worked in employment programs around supporting people into employment. And you'll find anomalies that we've now, I think, getting through with the difficulties that we now understand more about. So things like, you'll get somebody in, it might be a young woman, part-time job, she can do it, she's capable, you get her interview technique, you get her the job, well, you don't get her the job, she gets herself the job, and then can't afford the bus fare to get to the job. And it's just idiotic things like that that are just, well, what, you know, if you've got a job halfway across Manchester and you've got to get your kid to school, so you've got to take 2 buses, that costs money. And you can't do it if you haven't got money. So you have to look at every single aspect of it. One of the things that there's a project just in the other side of the city, near the Co-op building, which is based in Stockport, but they've opened a branch in Manchester, and it's like it's for women, exclusively women, who've got a job interview but haven't got the right clothes. They might not have been in work for years.
Yes.
They don't feel confident, and you go into this place and they get the clothing donated by manufacturers, by shops. It's all new. It's not second hand. And the woman comes in, she's got an interview for a job the following week. There's a stylist, as if you were going into a boutique, and they'll say, well, I think you'd look good in this thing. And they give them the outfit for the interview. And if they get the job, and 75% of them do, if they get the job, they give them another outfit for the first day at work.
Wow.
So if it's a job in a doctor's receptionist, right, they turn up in the new outfit, get the job, but then the first day, they need to look smart as well and feel confident. And so there are projects like that we're trying to generate all across the city. I mean, anyone can be referred to that.
Yes.
The job centre refers people. But then there are other areas of the city where we want to focus on particular ethnicities, particular age groups, and that can only be done if we work with people in those communities. It's not something you can do to people, you have to do it with them. There is no way of doing it to them. The government can try, every government tries to have top down. And I think the good thing in Greater Manchester now is because we've got Andy Burnham as mayor, he's able to lead a lot of those in terms of argument to government on a scale that makes it worth it to government to do. So I think he's been very helpful. So it's things like changing the name of a job centre to a Live Well centre. Why is it about a job? It's always, of course, it's about employment, but the whole way that the state presents itself to people is intimidating. It looks like it's punitive, it's punishing. Lots of people feel like going to the job centre is a punishment.
Yes, of course.
And it shouldn't be. It should be come in, sit down, let's see what you can do. What's wrong with the kids? Why can't you get them into school? Your husband's not well, you're caring for an elderly relative. Let's try and deal with all those issues before we even think about.
Yes.
And the trouble is that most employment programs for the last 50 years have been focused entirely on the individual, but not holistically. Just, this person's out of work, let's find a job and then they can go to this job. But what if there's all sorts of mental health barriers, lots of training barriers, the qualifications. There's no point sending people for jobs they're not qualified for, and so I think the whole approach that we're taking with Andy Burnham is about, let's look at where our people are, not where we'd like them to be. Let's start where they are, not where we think they are. And it's, so I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we do things with people and we try to start where they are rather than sitting in here dreaming up schemes and then going out and then 6 months later saying, why aren't these working? These people, you know, we need to change the electorate because they're not doing the right thing. You know, it's almost like it's their fault that they haven't, you know, we've come up with this genius idea to get them into work and it's failed. Well, why has it failed? Have we asked them? Mad idea. But so I think we do a lot more of that in Manchester now than I think probably in some other similar sized cities. I think we are at the forefront of that. Hopefully.
That's fantastic to hear that. Councillor, that was such a pleasure for me meeting and talking to you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.